He stood tall, silent, and unshaken, a black royal guard sworn to protect with honor, never to flinch, never to respond. But in an instant, that silence was shattered. A man stepped forward, sneering, and spat directly in his face. The crowd gasped. Cameras rolled, and the world held its breath. What would happen next? Would he break his vow of discipline, or would his response teach everyone watching a lesson they'd never forget? He was no stranger to discipline. Years of training had molded him into a figure of strength, composure, and unwavering duty. Standing as a royal guard was more than just a uniform. It was a symbol of honor, respect, and the unspoken promise to remain still, no matter the provocation. For him, it wasn't just a job. It was a calling. Behind the polished boots and the unyielding stare was a man with a story, a soldier who had given years of his life to service, believing that sacrifice and loyalty would earn him the same respect he gave to his country. Day after day, he stood in silence, watched by thousands of strangers. Some admired his presence, others tested his patience, and still others overlooked him entirely. To most, he was part of the scenery, an emblem of tradition. But to him, every second in position was a reminder of responsibility, the kind that demanded control over every emotion, every instinct, even in the face of insult or ridicule. And yet, despite his composure, there were moments he could never ignore. The subtle glances, the whispered remarks, the way some eyes lingered on his skin before his uniform. Even in the role of protector, he felt the weight of judgment pressing down. It was as if the color of his skin spoke louder than the service he had given, louder than the vows he had sworn. Still, he carried on, head high, shoulders squared, silent in his duty. He believed that dignity could be its own form of resistance. But on one particular day, as tourists gathered and cameras flashed, a single encounter would test that belief more than anything else he had endured. An act so brazen, so demeaning, that it would silence the crowd and force the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. He didn't know it yet, but the moment was already approaching, the moment that would turn an ordinary watch into an extraordinary stand. The day began like any other. Crowds swarmed through the palace gates, snapping photos, laughing, whispering in awe as they passed the guards. For most, it was a moment of light-hearted tourism, a chance to capture a piece of history. But for him, standing immovable in the sweltering sun, it was another test of patience, another reminder that dignity required silence. From the corner of his vision, he noticed a group lingering longer than the others. Most tourists respected the boundaries, snapping their pictures and moving along. But this group, loud, restless, emboldened, seemed fixated on him. Their laughter was sharper, their comments pointed, each one drifting just close enough for him to catch without reacting. Words that weren't meant to be heard but were deliberately loud enough to sting. At first, he stayed centered, his eyes locked forward, his training keeping him in place. But the whispers grew bolder. Doesn't even belong here. What a joke, hiding behind a uniform. A chuckle, followed by a muttered insult that made a few in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Some glanced away, pretending not to hear, while others pulled out their phones, sensing something brewing. Then came the shove. Not a violent one, but enough, a shoulder brushing against his, a smirk thrown in his direction, daring him to break formation. Still, he didn't flinch. His silence was his armor, his discipline stronger than the cruelty aimed at him. But cruelty has a way of testing limits. The man stepped closer, his face inches away, spitting words dripping with hate, and then spitting literally into his face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Cameras rose higher, voices whispered in disbelief. Some laughed nervously, as if unsure whether this was entertainment or outrage. Others stared, frozen, unwilling to intervene. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The soldier stood, unmoving, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling in measured breaths. The rules of his duty screamed at him, "Do not react." But the insult wasn't just about him. It was about every unspoken prejudice he had carried, every barrier he had endured. The silence that once protected him now felt like a cage. The crowd sensed it too. What would he do? Would he stay silent, letting the moment pass into the endless sea of quiet humiliations endured by men like him? Or would something break? The man who spat smirked, clearly believing he had won, believing that his hatred was more powerful than the uniform, the service, the humanity of the man before him. He turned as if to leave, satisfied with his display. But then the air shifted. The soldier didn't move, but the weight of the silence pressed heavier than ever. The tourists waited, holding their breath. Something was coming, something that would turn this ugly act into a moment none of them would ever forget. And when it did, the entire crowd would be forced to confront a truth many tried to ignore. The silence broke, not with his voice, not with his movement, but with the crowd. Phones were already raised, recording every second, their lenses capturing the spit still glistening on his face. Whispers rippled louder, sharper. Some shouted, demanding the guard retaliate. Others laughed, egging the aggressor on, hungry for a spectacle. And then the man doubled down. He stepped back into the soldier's space, mocking him with gestures, daring him to break. Each insult was louder than the last, echoing across the courtyard, venom dripping into every word. The air thickened, heavy with expectation. Inside, the soldier's chest burned, not from anger alone, but from restraint. He knew the rule drilled into him. No matter what happens, you do not move. You do not react. But what does silence mean? When dignity is stripped away in front of hundreds of watching eyes? Was discipline still strength? Or was it surrender? The moment teetered on a knife's edge. Then something shifted. Not from him, but from those around. A bystander finally shouted, their voice trembling but firm. "Enough!" Another followed, then another. The wave spread, people stepping forward, pulling the man back, forming a barrier not of uniforms, but of ordinary strangers who had seen too much. The aggressor resisted, his voice still filled with poison, but now the crowd wasn't laughing. The crowd wasn't silent. They were recording, shouting, and standing. The soldier remained motionless, but in that stillness, he realized something powerful. It wasn't about his reaction. It was about theirs. The world was watching, not just him, but the choice of everyone around him. The man was dragged away, still cursing, still spitting words into the air. But the soldier stood tall, the sun gleaming against his uniform, his silence now transformed, not weakness, but defiance. For the first time, the crowd applauded. Not a cheer, not laughter, but a slow, steady clap that grew louder, stronger, echoing against the palace walls. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't moved a muscle. Yet in that moment, he had said everything. But as the videos spread beyond the gates, a question loomed. Would the world see dignity, or just another spectacle? When the dust settled, the guard remained unmoved, his posture unshaken, his face steady, even as the sting of humiliation lingered. To the outside world, it looked like victory. The aggressor was pulled away, the crowd applauded, and the soldier stood tall in silence. But inside, he carried the weight of what had just happened, because for him, this wasn't a single incident. It was part of a story written long before that day. For many watching online, the moment was shocking. A raw reminder that even the most disciplined, respected figure in uniform could be targeted, not for who he was, but for the color of his skin. For others, it was a mirror, reflecting their own experiences, their own moments of silent endurance in the face of hate. The video spread, sparking debates, outrage, and praise. Some called it a symbol of strength. Others dismissed it as just another viral clip. But for those who knew the truth, it wasn't entertainment. It was a warning. Because behind that uniform was a man who endured what no one should have to. And that's the point. Racism doesn't care about titles, uniforms, or rules. It strips dignity in public, it silences voices, and it dares the world to look away. Yet in this moment, people didn't. They recorded, they shared, they spoke up, and maybe, just maybe, that silence broken in the crowd could echo into something larger. He left that day still in formation, still disciplined, still unbroken. But his story leaves us with a question we cannot ignore. How many more moments like this will it take? How many more lives humiliated, silenced, or endangered before we finally decide that enough is enough?